This movie's gotta be in my top 3 favorite Stephen King adaptations of all time. Let's do it. Misery is about this author named Paul Sheldon, and Paul has found his fame writing this series of books about this woman named Misery Chastain. However, Paul wants to be a more serious writer, so he decides to kill off Misery in his latest book so he can get away from that. And he goes to Colorado to write his new novel, and he finishes it. Paul then gets into the car and starts driving through a very snowy road, unaware that a storm is coming. And as he's driving, he ends up losing control in the blizzard and flips his car. We see Paul in his car barely alive, and we see somebody take a crowbar and force the door open and take him and his manuscript. And when Paul wakes up, he is in this makeshift hospital bed and he is introduced to Annie Wilkes. And he wakes up to Annie's voice telling him, "I'm your #1 fan," because it turns out she is a Misery superfan. So Annie also happens to be a nurse, so she has stabilized Paul and she explains to him that both of his legs are broken and his right shoulder is dislocated. She also tells Paul that the roads are closed because of the blizzard and the phone lines are also down, because Paul is worried that his agent and his daughter are going to be wondering where he is. Annie assures him that once the phones are back up, she'll call them, she'll get him to a hospital, all will be well. Now, Annie also sees that Paul had that manuscript with him and it's a new untitled book, and she asks him if he can read it. And he's like, "You literally saved my life, of course you can read it." It's at this point Paul first sees how disturbed Annie is. Because one day she absolutely loses her mind over the book because of the profanity in it. But freaked out, and it turns out that his latest Misery novel called Misery's Child has just recently been published, so one day Annie goes into town to he comes in every day raving about it and how brilliant Paul is and how much she loves him, until she gets to the point in the book where Misery dies. She comes into Paul's room in the middle of the night, losing her mind, breaking shit, screaming. And as she goes to leave, she looks at Paul and tells him, "Don't think about anybody coming to get you because I haven't called your daughter or your agent or the hospitals. And you better hope that nothing happens to me out here because if I die, you die." So Paul is absolutely terrified and he now knows that this woman is insane. And the next day she proves that even further when she comes in and she forces him to burn his manuscript. Because since she's his #1 fan, she knows everything about him and knows that because of superstition, he only makes one copy. She tells him, now that you've burned that filth, you can write a new Misery novel and bring her back to life. She buys him a typewriter and forces him to start writing another Misery novel. She also puts him in a wheelchair so he can write at the typewriter, and one day when Annie is in town, he finds a bobby pin on the ground and uses it to pick the lock of his room. He discovers that the phone does not work. However, he has been hoarding the pain medication that Annie has been giving him, and he finds some more and takes it. And in this very tense scene, he barely gets back into his room before Annie walks in the door. After Paul has gathered up enough painkillers, he asks Annie to have dinner with him that night to celebrate Misery's return because he's writing the book and she loves it. When she leaves the room, he puts the crushed up pills in her wine, which is a great plan until she spills her wine glass, so it's for nothing. Paul is actively getting better because time is passing, his arm's working again, his legs are getting better, and when Annie leaves and goes to town, he escapes and looks around the house, and one time he steals a knife. He also discovers this scrapbook that Annie keeps of all these newspaper clippings of all of these infant deaths that happened at the hospital that she worked at. This is how he finds out that Annie is a serial killer and he needs to do something. That night, while he's laying in bed, he takes the butcher knife that he stole and gets ready to stab Annie when she next comes in. However, Annie is onto him and she comes in while he's sleeping and injects him with something and he passes out. And when he wakes up, he finds that he is strapped to the bed. And Annie finds his knife and knows that he's been out of his room. And this is where we get the iconic hobbling scene where Annie re-breaks his leg so he cannot escape. All been going on. Paul's agent and daughter have reported him missing, and the local sheriff has been investigating. They found his car, they presume him to be dead, but the sheriff is not. And he's noticed Annie acting strangely in town, so he ends up going to her house. Annie throws Paul down into the basement to hide him, but Buster ends up seeing him and he is shot in the back and killed by Annie. Annie then tells Paul, "It's time, we're meant to be together, I have 2 bullets in this gun, like we have to go." Paul, being smart, is like, "But I'm almost done with Misery, we can bring her back to life." So that night, he ends up finishing the Misery novel and he sends Annie to get him his 3 celebratory things that he does every single time he finishes a book. She leaves to get him a cigarette, a match, and a glass of champagne. Paul had stolen some lighter fluid from the basement, and when she comes back, he has the manuscript on the ground with a page lit on fire ready to burn it. When she tells him, Paul, you can't, he says, why not? I learned it from you. He lights the thing on fire and Annie falls to her knees and starts putting it out with her bare hands, and during this, he picks up his typewriter and smashes her over the head. Ensues between the two of them. Annie shoots Paul in the shoulder. He stuffs the burned pages down her. Ultimately, Paul is finally able to kill her. About a year and a half later, Paul is recovering and he goes to lunch with his agent and they talk about his, which is the book that he originally burned that he had to completely rewrite. It turns out this book is a massive success, and Paul is like, honestly, I can't help but think that Annie Wilkes helped me with that because the whole ordeal contributed to it being a success. As he's seeing this, and as his agent is asking him if he would be interested in doing a non-fiction piece about what happened to him in that house, he sees Annie Wilkes approaching. Of course, it's just a hallucination, and when Paul looks back up, it's just a waitress, and she looks at him and tells him, I'm your #1 fan, and the movie ends.